Hey guys, tonight we slip into a place most of you probably haven't pictured before. An early morning in the Goryeo kingdom, where your eyelids are heavy, but the kiln fire in your future is even heavier. You wake up in a village where clay dust clings to every doorway, and the air itself tastes faintly of smoke and earth. The roosters are already trying their best heavy metal impressions, and the fog rolls across the paddies in a way that makes you wonder if it's worth crawling out of your warm quilt. Spoiler, it is, because the kiln doesn't wait. And also spoiler, you probably wouldn't last more than a morning here, not with the splinters, the endless hauling of clay, and the terrifying possibility of misjudging a fire that can melt your eyebrows off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mat beneath you is thin, the kind that gives you just enough padding to forget you're basically lying on the floor. Outside, the courtyard is hushed, except for a dog snuffling around for breakfast scraps. You push the wooden door aside, and damp mist slides across your skin like a cold towel you didn't ask for. The sun is nowhere to be seen, and that's fine. You don't really need it. What you need is time. Because every potter in this village knows that the morning hours are the best ones. You trudge past the small vegetable patch. Radishes poking out of dark soil, lettuce drooping like it stayed up too late binge-watching dramas that don't exist yet. There's no coffee waiting for you unless you count hot barley tea, which is, let's be honest, the decaf of motivation. Still, it warms your hands as you sip and stretch the stiffness from your shoulders. Across the lane, you hear a neighbour already coughing from yesterday's smoke. The Goryeo kilns are monstrous dragon-backed things that stretch along the hillsides. And their fires don't fade just because you went home last night. They smoulder and crackle like some grumpy beast demanding attention. You glance up at the slope where the long chimney mouths are exhaling faint trails. That's today's mountain to climb, but before you get there, you have to start small. The small chores always come first. Tying your hair back with a cloth strip, rubbing cracked hands with sesame oil that smells faintly nutty, and pulling on a robe already marked with streaks of dried clay. In this world, laundry is more of a suggestion than a promise. Your sandals slap softly against the packed dirt as you head toward the river, buckets swinging from your hand. The village itself is waking up in rhythm with you. A group of children run past, carrying bundles of firewood, tripping over their own feet, and laughing as though their chore is a game. Someone's mother calls out from a doorway, scolding her son for leaving behind his shoes. You notice an older man hunched over, brushing the dust off a half-finished jar, muttering under his breath. Maybe it's a prayer, or maybe he's cursing yesterday's cracks. Historians still argue whether these early potters leaned more toward quiet spiritual rituals, or plain old workplace grumbling. Either way, the morning soundtrack is familiar and oddly soothing. Your stomach growls, but you know better than to fill it just yet. Too much food before a long day at the wheel only makes you sluggish. Instead, you tuck a rice ball into your sleeve for later. It's wrapped in seaweed, and the salt clings to your fingers. You lick it off, shrugging. Hygiene standards in this century aren't exactly Michelin approved anyway. The path to the river winds past low mud brick homes. Smoke curls upward from stoves mingling with the fog. A water buffalo snorts as you pass, its eyes rolling in mild suspicion. You pat its flank, mostly to reassure yourself, and keep walking. Your sandals squish into the moist earth as you reach the water's edge. The river looks like a mirror someone smudged with a sleeve. The surface shimmers with light, but below it, the muddy banks are thick with what you came for. The lifeblood of your trade. Clay. You squat down, bucket beside you, and dig your fingers into the cold sludge. It sticks, it resists, and it leaves crescents under your fingernails you'll never quite wash away. That's the point. Every vessel you'll shape today starts here, in this unremarkable mud. Fact check for the sleep-deprived among you. The clay along Goryeo rivers was rich in iron and minerals, giving the famous celadon its subtle green hue, the kind of green that looks like jade when the glaze and fire cooperate, or like swamp water when they don't. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some potters believed frogs were lucky to spot during clay gathering, as if their slimy approval guaranteed fewer cracks later. Today, a frog actually plops into the water beside you, croaking as if to say, "Good luck, buddy, you'll need it." You haul up a chunk, heavier than it looks, and plop it into your bucket with a wet thud. It's not glamorous work, but there's a rhythm to it. Scoop, squish, lift, drop. Your breath fogs out in front of you, mixing with the river mist. Somewhere behind you, another potter hums a tune, off-key, but comforting in its persistence. As you stand and adjust the strap of your bucket, you feel the weight pull on your shoulder. It's the weight of bowls yet to exist, vases waiting for palace tables, maybe even jars that will be traded across seas. Or, more realistically, it's the weight of future cracked disasters you'll laugh about later with the other potters. The walk back feels slower with the bucket dragging you down, but the air is clearer now. The fog is lifting, and the first streaks of sunlight slip between the hills. The village is louder too. Someone beats laundry against a rock, chickens squabble over grain, and a cart rattles by with squeaky wheels. You step back to avoid splashes from its muddy trail. Your workshop looms ahead, a simple structure of wood and tile roof, its door propped open with a chipped jar that didn't make the cut. Inside, the wheel waits, silent and patient, a reminder that the day has only just started. The clay in your bucket is heavy, but it's also possibility. You set it down with a grunt, wipe your hands on your robe, and glance at the wheel with equal parts dread and affection. The morning has arrived, and the kiln smoulders up the hill like a dragon breathing in its sleep. For you, the first chapter of today's work is done, but the story is only beginning. The clay in your bucket is cool and sticky, almost pulsing with its own slow heartbeat as you lug it across the courtyard. Each step sends a slosh against the wooden sides, and the damp earth smell follows you like an eager puppy. The other potters nod in your direction, some already hunched over their own lumps of raw material, others stretching their backs like reluctant athletes about to run the most boring marathon imaginable. You head toward the riverside storage shed, a half-collapsed structure lined with stacks of drying lumps. These aren't random heaps. They're carefully chosen clay, sorted for grit, colour and texture. The picky potters of Goryeo believe that good celadon starts with picky gathering. If you skimp here, the final vase will remind you of it, slumping like a deflated melon, or cracking into what looks suspiciously like modern abstract art. You drop your fresh haul on the wooden floor, and the impact makes a dull, satisfying thud. With a flat paddle, you start kneading, folding in the way bakers knead dough, except instead of fluffy bread, what you get is heavier biceps and a reminder that this trade doubles as your daily workout. Little stones pop out as you push, clattering to the floor like tiny betrayals. You flick them aside. A good potter doesn't want grit scratching the smooth glaze later. Your hands are coated, wrists streaked, and you feel the skin tighten as the clay begins to dry against your knuckles. A bowl of water sits nearby, and you dip your fingers in, the chill biting. The clay loosens, slides again, and you keep folding. There's a rhythm: squash, fold, press, turn, almost like a drumbeat, steady and hypnotic. Fact-check moment for the curious insomniacs. Clay preparation was often a family or apprentice job in medieval Korea. The master potter rarely stooped to dig and knead. Instead, young apprentices did the grunt work while grumbling under their breath. And here's your quirky tidbit. Sometimes, clay was aged for months in pits to ripen, a process that allegedly made it more pliable. Whether that was science or superstition, historians still argue whether aging clay truly mattered, or if it was just a way to keep apprentices busy when the kiln schedule was light. Today, you don't have apprentices, just your own two tired arms. You chuckle quietly to yourself, imagining the modern gym membership pitch. Join now. Knead clay for 3 hours daily, burn calories and never see results you can eat. Not exactly a bestseller. Once the lumps are smooth, you pack them into balls about the size of melons. Each one is destined for a wheel session, but first you must mix in the right moisture. Too dry, and the clay cracks under your fingers. Too wet, and it slumps like a teenager on a Monday morning. You pour a trickle of river water over the surface, watching it bead, then sink. Slowly, you knead again, folding the moisture through. The clay sighs into compliance. Outside, the sun climbs higher, sending thin gold streaks across the roof tiles. You step into that light briefly, stretching your back and squinting at the distant line of hills. Beyond them lies Kaesong, the Goryeo capital, where your finished pots might one day travel. Imagine them sitting in noble households, filled with plum wine or pickled radish, admired not for your aching shoulders, but for their jade-like glow. The thought is oddly comforting. Back inside, You scoop some of the clay into a shallow trough, smoothing the surface flat. A child peers in from the doorway, eyes wide. It's one of the neighbor's boys, too young to work the wheel, but curious enough to lurk around like a small ghost. You grin, dip your hand into the wet clay, and flick a tiny blob onto his nose. He squeals and bolts, leaving you with a laugh echoing in the shed. That's one joke for the day, 2 more to go, if you're keeping track. With the clay balls prepared, you line them neatly on a low shelf, each one slightly glistening in the morning light. They look like dumplings, though far less appetizing. You resist the urge to draw faces into them. No time for comedy sketches when the kiln dragon waits. Still, you can't help noticing how each lump feels subtly different. One is denser, another slightly grainy, one soft enough to sink under your thumb. You make mental notes, because the clay will decide its own destiny. The thin-walled cup, the broad-bellied jar, the vase that might someday hold chrysanthemums in a scholar's study. Your back cracks as you straighten up. You wipe your clay-streaked hands on your robe, which already looks like a painter's drop cloth. The morning has turned warm, and sweat beads on your neck, mixing with the dust to form a sticky film. You reach for your gourd bottle, tip it back, and sip the tepid water inside. It tastes faintly metallic, but it clears your throat. Somewhere outside, the clang of a hammer echoes. Someone else is mending kiln tiles. A woman's voice rises in a folk song, drifting in and out with the breeze. It's haunting and ordinary at once. The kind of background music you barely register until it vanishes. You kneel again, shaping the last of the clay balls, when a frog hops across the threshold. Yes, another one, like some amphibian supervisor sent to check on your progress. You shake your head and mutter, "All right, you win. Pottery god of frogs." The creature blinks, unimpressed, and disappears under the shelf. By the time you finish, your arms ache. Your robe is ruined, and the floor is littered with pebbles and streaks of drying sludge. Yet you feel that quiet pride. The raw clay is ready, tamed from its riverbank chaos into usable form. You glance at the wheel in the corner, its wooden frame resting patiently. That's the next battle. For now, you close your eyes briefly, inhaling the mingled scents of damp earth and faint smoke drifting down from the kiln. The day stretches long ahead, but each step is necessary, and you've taken another one. The clay waits, obedient and silent, for your hands to give it shape. The wheel waits in the corner like an old friend, silent, sturdy, and slightly intimidating. Its wooden surface bears scars from years of spinning, grooves worn by countless hands before yours. You crouch beside it, brushing away a thin layer of dust that somehow reappears every morning. The wheel doesn't complain, but it doesn't make things easy either. It's powered by your legs, and the rhythm is as much muscle memory as it is art. You settle onto the low stool, its legs wobbling in protest, and rest your feet on the heavy lower stone. The first push sends the wheel into a slow, lazy spin, creaking like a tired ox. You push again, and again, until the top disc hums in a steady rotation. Your calves burn almost immediately, no surprise since this is essentially medieval cardio. If modern gyms offered potter's wheel spin class, people would sign up once, then never return. You take a lump of clay, heavier than it looks, and plop it in the wheel's center with a wet smack. The sound is oddly satisfying, like dropping mashed potatoes at a family dinner. Your hands press firmly, thumbs steady, forcing the lump into alignment with the wheel's spin. This is where balance begins. If the clay starts crooked, you'll be wrestling it all day. The wheel hums, your legs pump, and your fingers sink into the cool surface. The clay resists, bulges, and then yields, rising under your hands. It's hypnotic. One moment it's a wobbling blob, the next it hints at being a bowl. You lean forward, breath steady, and the shape sharpens. Fact break for your sleepy brain. The Goryeo wheel was kick-powered, with the potter constantly nudging the lower stone to keep momentum. It was a true test of endurance, especially when working larger vessels that could take hours. And the quirky tidbit? Some potters supposedly sang rhythmic songs to keep their kicking steady, part timekeeping, part entertainment. Historians still argue whether these songs were structured chants, or just muttered nonsense that happened to sound musical in the smoke-filled workshop. You hum a tune yourself, off-key but steady, imagining how ridiculous it would sound to anyone passing by. The ball of clay becomes a jar if my calves don't cramp. Har har. Not a hit single, but it gets you through the next push. That's joke number 1, by the way. The clay begins to rise taller, your hands guiding the walls upward. You pinch and coax, smoothing the surface with water. The wheel sprays little flecks that land on your robe and cheeks. Somewhere, a fly buzzes too close, lands on the rim of the forming bowl, and rides a few spins before being flung into oblivion. You chuckle softly. That counts as joke 2. Each vessel demands patience. Sometimes it slumps, leaning drunkenly to one side. Other times, it collapses completely, forcing you to squash it back into a ball and start over. You sigh but accept it. Mistakes are the tax you pay for mastery. You remind yourself that even palace-bound celadon started as stubborn lumps that refuse to cooperate. The bowl in front of you stabilizes, its rim smoothing under your fingers. You picture it finished, filled with steaming rice, its pale green glaze catching candlelight in a noble's hall. The thought keeps your hands steady. The wheel spins, your legs ache, and your robe grows heavier with wet streaks. A neighbor pokes his head in, eyebrows raised. "Already started?" he asks. You nod, not daring to let go of the clay. He grins, mutters something about your frog luck, and wanders off. You realize you're now known as the frog-approved potter, which honestly isn't the worst title. The wheel slows, and you give it another push with your heel. The clay wobbles slightly, but you adjust, smoothing it with wet fingers. This is where the artistry shows. Tiny corrections, invisible to anyone else, but crucial to the potter. One slip, and you'll be holding a lump again. Your third joke sneaks in when you mutter aloud, "If only dating was like this. Add water, keep steady pressure, and the shape improves." You laugh quietly, shaking your head, and the bowl's rim wavers in sympathy. Careful, you remind yourself. Humor is fine, but the wheel punishes distraction. The vessel rises to a modest height, symmetrical enough to satisfy your tired eyes. You slow the wheel gradually, letting the motion fade until the clay sits still, proud and waiting. With a thin cord, you slice it free from the wheel's surface, lifting it carefully onto a wooden board. One down, dozens more to go. You sit back, flexing your calves, and wipe sweat from your brow. The morning light spills through the doorway, casting soft shadows across the floor. Your hands are raw, wrists sore, but there's a quiet satisfaction in seeing that first piece stand tall. Outside, the world carries on, children shouting, roosters crowing, smoke curling lazily from the hillside kiln. You take another lump of clay, slap it onto the wheel, and begin again. The rhythm returns, steady and familiar, a lullaby of spinning wood and squelching clay. The wheel demands patience, muscle, and humor in equal measure. And as you shape the next vessel, you realize that this quiet dance between your hands and the earth will carry you through the day. You press another lump of clay onto the wheel, this one heavier than you'd like, and as it slaps down with a wet thud, you wonder briefly if the clay is mocking you. It sits there, smug and immovable, until your fingers press down and force it into the spin. The cool texture spreads across your palms, like chilled butter that doesn't want to melt. The sound, squish, squeak, squish, fills the quiet workshop, punctuated by the steady thump of your foot driving the wheel. Your thumbs press into the center, carving a hollow that widens with every push. Water trickles down your fingers, dripping onto the clay, and the whole thing becomes slippery enough to threaten mutiny. You mutter to it softly, as if soothing a cranky toddler. "Stay with me. Don't collapse. We're almost something." To your relief, the sides hold. The clay doesn't care, of course, but talking to it feels better than cursing at it. Fact check for those of you drifting off. In Goryeo times, celadon's signature smoothness came not just from clay quality, but from the potter's hands mastering this very moment, the first shaping. Any wobble here echoed later, no matter how perfect the glaze. And the quirky tidbit? Some old manuals claimed that potters should avoid strong emotions while shaping, since anger or sorrow could travel through the hands and disturb the clay. Historians still argue whether that's practical psychology or mystical nonsense. But honestly, after a few collapses, you start to believe mood might matter. The vessel under your palms begins to breathe. You can almost feel it expanding, as if it knows it's becoming more than a lump. The sides rise, a fragile cylinder. Your fingers press lightly, coaxing a curve, and suddenly a bowl exists where only mud sat before. That moment is always strange. A transformation so ordinary for a potter, but still magical enough to catch your breath. A drop of sweat lands right on the rim, darkening the clay. You laugh at the thought. Congratulations, bowl. You now contain electrolytes. That's joke 1, delivered just in time. The wheel spins steadily, your calves aching with the effort. The bowl grows, widens, then wavers. The rim dips like a drunken dance partner. You sigh and smooth it, fingers steadying the wobble. Another vessel threatens rebellion, but you refuse to let it win. A fly buzzes past your ear, and you flinch, nearly pressing too hard. You mutter, "If this collapses, I'm blaming you, fly." Joke 2. The clay starts to lean, walls sagging outward, too thin. You pinch gently, guiding it back, like persuading a cat to leave a forbidden shelf. Slow, patient, pretending you're in control. The bowl resists but finally settles. You exhale in relief. From the doorway, the same boy peeks in, clay still smudged on his nose from earlier. His eyes widen as he watches the bowl appear under your hands. You imagine he's storing this away as future bragging rights. "I saw a bowl get born." You wink at him, but he scurries off, embarrassed. The bowl is nearly done now. The rim curves gracefully, the sides smooth. You run a damp cloth over the surface, polishing away fingerprints. The wheel slows, and you cut it free with a taut string, sliding it carefully to the board beside the first. 2 siblings, alike yet distinct. You lean back, stretching your shoulders. Outside, the morning has ripened. Sunlight glints off puddles near the river, and distant chatter drifts from the fields. You grab another lump, plop it down, and sigh at the endlessness of it all. This is your life, clay wheel patience, and somewhere in the repetition, a rhythm forms that is almost peaceful. Fact for the dreamy listeners. Goryeo celadon was so prized that Chinese envoys praised it as first under heaven. Nobles competed for the smoothest bowls, the palest greens, the most delicate curves. Meanwhile, here you are, sweating into your robe and wondering if you can sneak an early lunch. The third joke arrives when you glance at the wobbling lump and mutter, "If this one collapses, I'll call it modern art and charge double." You chuckle softly, though no one else is around to hear. The wheel spins again, your hands steady, your feet thumping in time. The clay resists, the clay yields, and another shape begins to rise. The cycle repeats, hypnotic and strangely comforting. By now your forearms ache and your calves feel like lead, but the clay is pliant under your fingers, cool and damp, and you find yourself leaning into the work with something like affection. You're not just shaping clay, you're shaping a quiet kind of pride, one bowl at a time. The board beside you grows heavier with newborn vessels, their rims catching the light. Each one carries the morning's effort, each one a fragile promise. And as you prepare the next lump, you know the day has only begun, yet somehow you feel calmer, settled into the rhythm of touch, spin, and shape. The wheel creaks under you as you set down yet another lump of clay, this one smaller, more forgiving. Your legs move automatically, heel nudging the heavy lower stone, and the top begins its familiar spin. You lean forward, elbows tucked in, hands pressing the clay down, then up, then down again. This isn't just shaping, it's rhythm, like drumming without sticks, or dancing without music. The wheel gives you its own tempo, and you move with it. Your fingers press gently, coaxing the lump upward. It grows into a slender cylinder, then slouches sideways, then rises again as you correct it. This push and pull, collapse and rebuild cycle is the heart of pottery. You don't fight the clay, you negotiate with it. Sometimes you win, sometimes it does, and sometimes the outcome is a compromise that looks suspiciously like a drinking cup. Fact check for your sleepy ears. In medieval Goryeo workshops, potters often produced dozens, sometimes hundreds, of pieces in a single day. Quantity was as important as quality, because not every bowl survived the fire. At least half might crack, warp, or explode in the kiln. The quirky tidbit: some believed the kiln dragon, imagined as a fiery spirit inside the massive tunnel, decided which pots lived or died. Historians still argue whether potters genuinely believed in this fiery judge, or if it was simply a convenient way to explain why hard work sometimes turned to rubble overnight. You pause to dip your hands in the water bowl, cool droplets slipping between your fingers, before pressing the clay again. It's slick, smooth, alive under your palms. The rim forms, thin and trembling, like it might sigh and collapse any moment. You steady it, breathing slowly, reminding yourself that patience is half the craft. The bowl spins higher, and you feel your shoulders knot. Your body aches from hours of repetition, but your mind drifts into the rhythm. Spin, press, release. Spin, press, release. It's almost meditative, until your stomach growls so loudly you swear the clay shivers in sympathy. That's your first joke. Even the clay knows I need lunch. The vessel on the wheel isn't grand. It won't sit in a palace hall or impress an envoy. It's a workaday piece. Maybe for soup, maybe for storing leftover rice. And that's fine. Not every creation has to be immortalized in history books. Some just need to survive long enough to hold stew without leaking. You pause, stretch your legs, and glance at the growing collection on the board beside you. They wobble slightly in the draft, rims uneven, but they look almost proud lined up together. Like siblings in a family portrait, where one insists on crossing their eyes. Outside, the village grows louder. Hammering, children laughing, a dog barking at nothing. The kiln up the hill sends a puff of smoke into the sky, and you imagine the dragon within yawning awake. Soon it will demand fuel, attention, and a small offering of your sanity. For now, though, you stay with the wheel. Your second joke slips out when a clump of clay splats off your hand and lands on the floor with a noise suspiciously like a flatulent trumpet. You glance around, grin, and mutter, "Well, that's one way to make music." The clay collapses again, its thin walls sagging into a lump. You sigh, flatten it, and begin anew. This is the truth of pottery. Endless repetition, endless patience. Every failure teaches you something, even if that something is, don't sneeze while shaping a vase. A neighbor's rooster struts into the workshop, pecks at the wet floor, and eyes you like it's judging your technique. You laugh softly, joke 3 achieved, and shoo it away with your foot. It leaves a muddy footprint as if signing your work. The wheel keeps spinning, and your hands keep pressing. By now you don't think about the movements. They flow instinctive, like breathing. The clay rises, slumps, rises again. You murmur encouragement, half to yourself, half to the earth in your palms. Slowly, the shape steadies, walls smooth, rim even. A cup emerges, plain but proud. You slice it free, set it on the board, and sit back. Sweat drips down your temple, clay streaks your forearms, and your calves throb from hours of kicking. But your heart feels steady. The rhythm of shaping has done its work, not just on the clay, but on you. The wheel waits for the next lump, and you oblige. One more vessel, one more chance at balance, one more step in the long, sleepy march of the day. You leave the wheel behind for a while, stretching your stiff legs, rolling your shoulders, and flexing your clay-stained fingers. The vessels sit nearby, soft and vulnerable, like little soldiers not yet trained for battle. They will dry, and later, if fortune smiles, they'll survive the fire. But before any of that can happen, they need their coats, the liquid skins that give them color, sheen, and sometimes a hint of magic. You shuffle over to the low workbench, where glaze jars rest, their outsides crusted with drips from months of use. The lids are rough wood, ill-fitting, and when you pry one open, a puff of earthy mineral scent rises, tickling your nose. Inside, the slurry swirls in muted tones, greys, creams, pale blues. It doesn't look like much now, but later, under the heat of the kiln, it might glow like jade, or it might come out streaked like swamp water. You never really know. Fact time. Goryeo potters became famous for their celadon glazes, those soft green surfaces that looked like polished jade. This reputation stretched far beyond Korea, with Chinese and Japanese collectors admiring their subtlety. And here's your quirky tidbit. Sometimes potters added powdered animal bones or plant ash into the glaze, not because they wanted to invent soup for ghosts, but because the minerals inside, calcium, silica, iron, changed the way light refracted off the finished surface. Historians still argue whether these additions were carefully calculated experiments or just desperate improvisations that happened to work. You stir the slurry with a bamboo ladle, the mixture gurgling like a muddy brook. The glaze feels heavy, almost alive, clinging to the stick like it doesn't want to let go. Your hand moves in slow circles, hypnotic, and you joke to yourself, this is medieval bubble tea just without the tea, the bubbles, or anything fun. That's one laugh for the count. When the slurry looks smooth, you scoop some into a shallow basin. A bowl from earlier, its clay still damp but firm enough, waits beside you. With both hands you dunk it, twisting gently, letting the glaze kiss every surface. It emerges dripping, coated in a milky film that hides its future. You place it carefully on the drying rack, where it sits like a ghost version of itself. Another bowl follows, and another. Each time you dip, swirl, lift, you whisper small prayers you don't really believe in. You imagine the kiln dragon listening, deciding whether to bless or ruin your efforts. Maybe that superstition is silly, but when a single crack can erase hours of work, even the most rational mind starts whispering bargains to invisible judges. Your second joke arrives when a fly buzzes too close and gets stuck in the wet glaze. You fish it out with a stick, muttering, "Congratulations, little guy. You almost became part of the national art heritage." You flick it away, leaving a tiny ripple behind. The glaze isn't only about beauty, it's also practical. It seals the porous clay, makes the bowls usable, keeps liquids from seeping out. Without it, your hard work would be nothing more than decorative dirt. Still, you can't deny the thrill when you imagine the final sheen. Maybe pale green like dew on morning grass. Maybe smoky grey with hints of blue. Or maybe, if the fire misbehaves, blotchy brown that looks like something a cow sneezed out. You try not to think about that last one. Nearby, a younger apprentice crushes mineral chunks with a mortar and pestle, each strike echoing like a drum. Powder drifts into the air, settling on his nose until he sneezes explosively. You laugh. That's joke number 3, and he glares, wiping his sleeve across his face. "Careful," you tell him. "That sneeze might end up in someone's teacup." He doesn't find it as funny as you do. The day warms as you work. Sunlight sneaks through cracks in the workshop wall, painting thin golden stripes across the racks of ghostly bowls. You move steadily, dipping, brushing, and sometimes splattering when your hand slips. The floor is already dotted with hardened glaze, a record of months of mistakes and experiments. If archaeologists ever dig here centuries later, they'll probably think you held paint wars instead of making pottery. The last jar waits in the corner. Its lid is heavier, stubborn. You pry it off, and inside lies the prized celadon mixture, smooth, pale, and promising. You dip the ladle slowly, reverently, as though you're scooping up liquid moonlight. This glaze, when it works, makes nobles sigh and merchants jostle for bids. When it doesn't, it just looks like cabbage soup. You set a small vase on the table, brush trembling slightly as you apply the glaze with long strokes. The sound is soft, swish after swish, like a broom sweeping across silk. You don't rush. Every stroke feels like a secret, a gamble, a quiet hope. By the time you finish, the vase glistens faintly, almost glowing in the dim light. You lean back, sighing, hands dripping with grey slurry, shirt splattered with streaks. It's messy, tedious, unpredictable. But in this messy, tedious work lies the possibility of beauty. Beauty that might last centuries if the kiln dragon allows it. The glaze has dried into a chalky skin, ghost-like and fragile. And now comes the part you've been both dreading and anticipating all morning. The kiln. Your stomach flutters the way it does before a test you didn't study for. You know the drill, but the kiln has a mind of its own. The dragon kiln squats at the edge of the village, half dug into a hillside, its body stretching up the slope like some slumbering beast. Long, brick-lined chambers snake upward in a series of steps. You trudge up the path with a wooden rack balanced across your shoulders, each vessel rattling slightly with every uneven step. If one topples, you'll cry, but at least your tears will be quiet enough that only the frogs will hear. Here's the mainstream fact. Goryeo kilns were often no-borigama style, long-climbing kilns built into hillsides, using the natural slope to distribute heat. This allowed for higher firing temperatures and more even results than simple pit kilns. And here's your quirky tidbit. Potters sometimes believed that tossing food into the fire, fish heads, rice cakes, even bits of dried seaweed, would keep the kiln spirit happy. It wasn't really about seasoning the ceramics, though that mental image is hilarious. Historians still argue whether such offerings were widespread religious practice or just local folk rituals whispered among nervous potters on bad days. You reach the kiln mouth, its dark throat yawning, smelling of old ash and soot. The firebox sits at the base, blackened from years of roasting clay. Even standing near it makes your face prickle with heat. You can already hear a faint crackle as another potter tests kindling. Sparks pop, like mischievous fireflies too caffeinated to rest. You bend low and slide the first tray inside. The shelves are rough but sturdy, built to survive infernal blasts. Every bowl, every vase must be arranged carefully, like guests at a dinner party who hate sitting next to each other. Too close and they fuse, too far and the heat flows unevenly. You shuffle them around until satisfied, muttering like a stage director preparing actors who refuse to follow cues. Joke number 1. The kiln swallows your work piece by piece. Rows of bowls line the shelves, their pale glaze catching faint glimmers of light. Some tilt slightly, like drunken monks, but you decide to leave them. It's too late to fix every wobble. An older potter notices, raises an eyebrow and says, "Those will collapse." You shrug. Or they'll be avant-garde. Joke number 2. Loading continues. Larger jars demand the lower levels, where the heat will lick fiercest. Smaller cups nestle higher, basking in gentler warmth. You sweat freely, shirt sticking to your back, hair plastered against your forehead. A smear of glaze itches on your cheek, but your hands are too filthy to wipe it. The kiln doesn't care about your comfort. Finally, the chamber is full. You retreat, wiping your palms on your tunic. Another potter seals the opening with bricks and clay, leaving only small spy holes through which you'll peer later like nosy neighbors. Woodpiles nearby, logs stacked taller than you. Someone calls, "Ready?" and the group nods in unison. The fire begins small, just twigs and straw, coaxed with careful breaths. It snaps to life, spreading along the kindling until logs catch, glowing red, then white. The kiln roars and smoke snakes upward into the blue sky, carrying with it the scent of pine and charred history. Your eyebrows threaten to crisp every time you lean too close. Joke number 3. You step back quickly, muttering, "I'd like to keep at least half of them." The dragon stirs fully now, heat pulsing in waves. You can feel it even in your bones. You squint into the spy hole, glimpsing flames curling around the shelves, licking at the bowls like greedy tongues. The glazes, invisible before, will soon transform, though whether into masterpieces or disasters, nobody knows. Your job now? Feed the beast. Logs go in at steady intervals, the rhythm set by experience and instinct. Too little, and the fire cools. Too much, and the ware may blister. Hours will pass like this, sweat pouring, muscles aching, eyes watering. You already know tonight's dreams will be full of flickering orange light. And yet, despite the strain, there's something mesmerizing about it. The roar of fire, the dance of embers, the sense that you and your fellow potters are performing an ancient ritual older than memory. You stand watch, guardian of clay dreams, whispering bargains to the kiln dragon. Maybe, just maybe, this time it will be kind. At last, the kiln sealed and roaring, you step back with your fellow potters. The fire doesn't need constant coaxing right now. Instead, it's in that steady middle stage, the heat crackling like a satisfied belly after a feast. You're free for a moment, and the village calls you to something just as important as flames and clay: food. You shuffle down the slope, arms hanging like soggy laundry, stomach grumbling in a way that rivals the kiln's roar. By the time you reach the communal eating space, the smells already beckon. Steamed barley rice, thin cabbage soup, a whiff of garlic and sesame. Simple, humble, and yet it might as well be a royal banquet after hours of sweat and fire. Here's the mainstream fact. Medieval Korean villages often ate in shared spaces, meals built around rice or barley, supplemented with vegetables, kimchi, and the occasional fish or meat. Goryeo elites enjoyed lavish spreads, but common potters like you made do with what the season allowed. The quirky tidbit? In some kiln villages, potters supposedly believed eating too much during firing would anger the kiln dragon, so they kept meals modest, not out of health trends, but out of superstition. Historians still argue whether these food taboos were real practices or exaggerated folklore told centuries later. You plop down onto a wooden bench, the heat of the kiln still clinging to your clothes. A fellow potter ladles soup into your bowl, and you watch the steam rise, curling like kiln smoke. You stir it absent-mindedly, then lift it to your lips. Warm, salty, thin, but oddly comforting. A mouthful of barley rice follows, chewy and filling, sticking in your teeth in a way that makes you think of wet clay. Joke number 1. Around you, the chatter begins. Someone claims the magistrate's nephew has been sneaking around the neighbor's daughter, and suddenly spoons freeze mid-air. Another insists they saw a strange light over the hills last night. A fox spirit, they whisper, eyes wide. You nod sagely and say, or maybe it was just the apprentice's lantern. He gets lost walking home every night. Joke number 2. The gossip swirls, louder than the cicadas outside. Some stories feel true, others drift toward absurdity. You listen, half amused, half lulled, the rhythm of voices blending with the scraping of bowls. There's comfort in this small circle of voices. The same hands that moulded clay beside you now gesturing wildly about neighbours, nobles, and nonsense. A boy rushes in, barefoot, hair sticking out like a haystack. He waves his arms. A chicken got into the drying racks. Everyone groans, setting down spoons. You sigh, picturing tiny claw prints across your carefully glazed bowls. Someone mutters, maybe it'll be a new design trend. Joke number 3. After the chaos dies down, you return to your soup. The sky outside has shifted. The bright blue of morning, now deepening toward the heavy gold of midday. Heat presses from both above and below. The sun beating on your back, the memory of the kiln burning in your bones. You lean against the wall, eyelids heavy for a second, before a sharp elbow from your neighbour jolts you upright. Don't fall asleep in your soup, he warns, smirking. Meal ends with a few last bites of kimchi, the tangy spice cutting through the heaviness. You lick your lips, savouring the sting, then push the empty bowl away. Around you, laughter still bubbles, stories still spin, but you rise slowly. The kiln still waits, the fire still hungry, and the bowls inside still gamble for survival. With a belly slightly fuller and spirits slightly lighter, you stretch, crack your neck, and prepare to return uphill. Behind you, the chatter continues, blending with the sound of cicadas and the faint echo of the roaring kiln. Ahead lies more waiting, more fire, and more quiet prayers whispered into smoke. The fire has been fed, the bowls are sealed inside, and your belly is pleasantly heavy with barley and soup. Now comes the longest stretch of the potter's day, waiting. You return to the kiln slope, the heat rolling outward like an invisible wall, and settle on a flat rock shaded by a pine tree. The cicadas drone their steady background music, and for a while, time seems to drag its feet. Your job now is patience, which, as it turns out, is harder than hammering clay into shape. Every so often you stand, add logs, squint into the spy hole, and then sit back down again. The kiln does most of the work, but you must remain vigilant, like a babysitter for dozens of bowls that might shatter if left alone. Here's your mainstream fact. Celadon glazes in Goryeo kilns required very specific firing temperatures, usually around 12 and 50 degrees Celsius. Too cool, and the glaze stayed dull and chalky. Too hot, and the vessels blistered or warped. A quirky tidbit, potters sometimes stuck small pieces of pine needles into spy holes, watching how quickly they burned to estimate temperature. An early, smoky version of a thermometer. Historians still argue whether this method was truly reliable science or just a potter's hopeful trick passed down like folklore. You watch the smoke curl from the chimney, its colour shifting from grey to bluish white. That's supposed to mean the fire's in a good range, but you squint anyway, half convinced the smoke is just mocking you. Joke number 1. You mutter to yourself, maybe it's just signalling that lunch is over and nap time has begun. The hours drag on. You shift on the rock, stretch your legs, and try counting bowls in your head, though you lose track after 37. Another potter paces like a restless cat, muttering calculations about wood usage. A third sits cross-legged, eyes closed, pretending to meditate but clearly just napping. You envy him. Sometimes you lean close to the spy hole. Inside, flames leap like dancers, their orange skirts swirling around your precious bowls. You imagine the glaze melting, smoothing, shining. But then you remember how often the kiln has betrayed you before. A cracked rim here, a warped body there, each one a tiny heartbreak. Still, there's hope. The dragon may breathe gently this time. The waiting breeds conversation. Someone starts wondering if the king himself has ever held a bowl from this very kiln. You laugh, joke number 2, and say, if he did, I hope he didn't notice the one with the lopsided bottom. The others chuckle, half nervous, half proud. Deep down, everyone hopes their work will travel far, even if it's just to a nearby noble's kitchen. You watch shadows lengthen as the sun drifts westward. The pine tree's shade stretches, finally covering more of the slope, but the kiln still blazes, indifferent to time. Occasionally, the fire belches sparks that swirl upward like a swarm of angry fireflies. You wave them away from your tunic, thankful not to add new burn holes to your already patchy wardrobe. To pass the time, someone pulls out a flute. The melody is simple, repetitive, slightly off-key, but in this drowsy moment, it feels perfect. You lean back, eyes half closed, letting the tune blend with the crackle of fire and the hum of cicadas. For a few minutes, it feels like the whole world has slowed to a sleepy rhythm. Joke number 3 slips in when the flautist suddenly squeaks a note so sharp it scares a sparrow out of the tree. Everyone bursts into laughter, including him. Still, tension lingers under the surface. Every log you feed, every puff of smoke, every flicker through the spy hole could spell success or failure. You whisper small bargains again, promises to sweep the workshop twice as often, to share your rice cakes with the kiln workers, even to stop teasing the apprentice. If only the dragon delivers beautiful, jade-like bowls. As the afternoon deepens, your body tires. You rub your gritty eyes, yawn until your jaw cracks, and lean on your knees. Yet the kiln doesn't yawn back. It continues its ancient work, steady, hungry, inscrutable. Waiting here feels endless, like being trapped in time itself, where only fire and smoke mark the passing hours. Your legs are stiff from sitting on the rock, your face hot from the kiln's radiance, and your head foggy from the endless cycle of feeding logs and squinting into spy holes. To break the monotony, your mind wanders toward dreams. Dreams not of naps, though those sound heavenly, but of where your pottery might end up once the firing is done. You imagine it. A bowl you shaped with tired hands, now gleaming with celadon glaze, carried far from this smoky hillside. Maybe it ends up in the hands of a merchant who packs it carefully among silks and dried ginseng. From there, perhaps it travels to Kaesong, the bustling capital of the Goryeo dynasty, where nobles stroll in their layered robes and debate matters of poetry and politics over tea. Mainstream fact, Goryeo celadon became prized across East Asia, known for its translucent, jade-like surface and elegant forms. It wasn't just tableware, it was a statement of refinement, associated with Buddhist rituals, aristocratic banquets, and royal courts. Quirky tidbit. Some bowls were deliberately cracked or inlaid with designs that only revealed themselves under candlelight, as though they were in on a private joke with their owners. Historians still argue whether such subtle tricks were meant to honor Buddhist concepts of imperfection, or simply to keep wealthy collectors entertained at dinner. You picture a nobleman lifting one of your bowls, sipping tea, his silk sleeves brushing the rim. He pauses, admiring the glaze that pools faintly darker at the base, as if water still lingers there. You chuckle softly, joke number 1, imagining him grumbling, too small for rice, too big for wine, but very pretty for holding air. Your daydream expands. Maybe a Buddhist monk receives a vase from this very kiln, placing it in a temple hall filled with chanting. Incense curls in the air, blending with the faint shine of celadon under lantern light. The vase, humble in your hands, becomes holy in his. You wonder how many bowls and jars carry more than food. They carry meaning, devotion, a glimpse of calm. But trade, too, tugs at your thoughts. Traders on the coast might barter your wares for salt, pearls, or fabrics. Maybe one bowl even sails across the sea, packed carefully in straw, bouncing on the deck of a Chinese junk. Who knows? Perhaps centuries from now, a collector in a faraway land will dig it from the earth, hold it up, and gasp at its beauty. Joke number 2 sneaks in. Or maybe they'll just wonder why the bottom wobbles like a tipsy goat. The fire pops loudly, pulling you back to the present. You toss another log into the kiln, then settle again, still weaving stories. There's pride in the idea that your bowls might travel farther than you ever will. You, who rarely wander beyond this village, might have your handiwork grace courts and temples you'll never see. It's a quiet sort of immortality, your name forgotten, but your clay remembered. Nearby, an older potter shakes his head. Don't think too much about nobles, he says, as if reading your thoughts. Most of our bowls end up in farmer kitchens. Soup, porridge, maybe fish stew if they're lucky. You smile. Joke number 3. Well, then I hope at least the fish stew tastes like royal banquet. He laughs, slapping your shoulder. You glance again through the spy hole. Inside, the flames have softened, glowing steady and deep. The bowls remain hidden, but in your mind, you see them shining already. Pale greens and soft greys, ready for journeys grand or humble. Whether on a noble's table or in a farmer's hut, each one will carry food, warmth, and a touch of beauty, and so, as the kiln breathes, you let yourself drift between smoke and dreams, imagining futures for clay that has yet to emerge. The fire quiets to a steady roar, like a beast finally satisfied. The kiln has been stoked for hours, and though it still needs tending, the climax of its fury has passed. Now you wait for it to cool, a patience-testing stretch where every potter's nerves tighten. The bowls inside, your bowls, have crossed through fire. Soon you'll learn who survived, who failed, and who turned into a cautionary tale. You sit near the entrance, sweat still drying on your skin. as the heat radiates in shimmering waves. Your hands twitch, eager to pry open the bricks, but you know better. To peek too early is to risk ruining everything. So you fold your arms, tap your foot, and try to distract yourself with thoughts that aren't about fragile clay. Here's the mainstream fact. In Goryeo pottery, cooling was just as crucial as firing. If the kiln cooled too quickly, pots could crack from thermal shock. If it cooled too slowly, glazes might dull or bubble. The quirky tidbit? Some potters swore by sprinkling water near, but not inside the kiln, claiming the hiss of steam soothed the dragon's temper. Historians still argue whether this was practical temperature control or just a soothing ritual for nervous craftsmen. The hours crawl. At last, when it's safe, the ceiling bricks are pried away. A smoky sigh escapes the kiln, curling into the dusk. You peer inside, heart hammering. The first glimpse is always the same. Rows of muted shapes, their glazes dulled by ash, waiting for air to reveal them. You step forward and lift a small cup. Relief floods you. It's intact, the glaze smooth and even. The pale celadon shines faintly, like dew caught in porcelain form. You grin, turning it in the light. Joke number 1 slips out. Congratulations, little cup. You've survived boot camp, but not all pieces are so lucky. You pick up a vase whose body has slumped sideways, as though it fainted mid-firing. Another bowl reveals a long crack running from rim to base, splitting it like a scar. A jar's glaze has blistered, forming strange bubbles that make it look as though it caught a skin disease. You laugh bitterly. Joke number 2. Well, at least it's unique. The world's first pox-inspired vase. The failures sting, but they're also familiar. Every potter has felt the disappointment of cracks and warps. You set them aside gently, as though comforting old friends who didn't pass their trials. Then you move on, lifting another bowl, then another. Some are stunning. Their celadon flawless, shimmering in the fading light. You can't help but trace your finger across the surface, marveling at how fire and clay conspired to make something delicate, almost ethereal. A group gathers around the kiln, voices rising. Some cheer at their successes, others groan at their losses. The air fills with a mixture of relief and frustration, joy and jest. One apprentice holds up a cup so warped it looks like it melted sideways. He says proudly, "Modern art." You all laugh. Joke number 3, deciding that maybe, centuries from now, collectors will fight over such avant-garde pieces. Still, the truth is sobering. For every perfect celadon bowl, there are several failures. The kiln giveth, the kiln taketh away. You sigh, feeling both proud and weary, hands streaked with ash and glaze dust. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Dig clay, spin wheels, mix glazes, and face the dragon once more. For now, you carry your survivors carefully, setting them aside like newborns after a storm. Each one holds not just food or drink, but the memory of fire, the gamble of patience, and the humor of survival. The survivors gleam on a wooden bench, still warm to the touch, as though their hearts are cooling slowly under your palm. You lift one carefully, a small bowl with a faint bluish tint, almost like mist caught in clay. The glaze isn't just color, it's mood. This is the moment when the potter's work crosses from craft into art. In Goryeo, celadon wasn't merely tableware. It was status, it was poetry, it was frankly bragging rights. Nobles and royals treasured these pieces, sometimes commissioning sets with inlaid designs so intricate they looked like moonlight painted in liquid glass. The mainstream fact here, the inlay technique, known as sangam, was invented during the Goryeo period and became the dynasty's signature contribution to world ceramics. Potters carved designs into the clay, filled them with contrasting colors, and let the glaze fuse it all into shimmering depth. The quirky tidbit. Some artisans supposedly hid tiny doodles, like fish or smiling faces, inside the bowl's curves, knowing only the most observant tea drinkers would spot them. Historians still argue whether these hidden marks were jokes, signatures, or simply a way for apprentices to leave their secret stamp on history. You run your thumb over a piece with a lotus flower frozen mid-bloom, the inlay crisp and delicate. Holding it to the light, you notice how the glaze pools just slightly in the carved lines, deepening the shadows. It looks almost alive, as if water will drip from the petals any second. Nearby, a fellow potter mutters about glaze thickness, shaking his head over a vase that's turned out cloudy. "Too much ash in the mix," he sighs. You nod sympathetically. Pottery is like making soup without a recipe. Sometimes delicious, sometimes a disaster, and always unpredictable. Joke number 1. At least no one has to eat the soup out of that vase. Later, you set the finest bowls on a woven mat, admiring them like gemstones. They are both practical and absurd. Objects meant to hold rice or tea, yet too beautiful to risk chipping. It's like buying a silk pillow you're afraid to sleep on. But beauty was the point. For nobles, these weren't just dishes. They were declarations of refinement, a way to say, my taste is so sophisticated, it needs its own cabinet. You think of court banquets where such bowls might be used, carrying delicacies to people who never touched clay with bare hands. Historians still argue whether the artisans themselves received proper recognition or were considered just anonymous labourers in the background. You suspect the latter. The irony stings. Your sweat creates beauty, but someone else drinks the prestige. A child toddles past, pointing at one cup with wide eyes. Moonwater, she whispers. You chuckle. Joke number 2. That's one way to sell it. Moonwater collection. Limited edition. As evening deepens, the finished pieces are sorted. Perfects for patrons, flawed ones for family or reuse, broken shards tossed aside. Yet even shards hold stories. Some potters keep them as reminders, a kind of ceramic graveyard that whispers, remember the dragon's teeth. You linger with your best bowl, holding it close, almost protective. The glaze glimmers like pale jade, smooth under your fingers. It's hard not to imagine centuries ahead, when some scholar might dig it from the earth and gasp, calling it masterpiece. You smirk at the thought. Joke number 3. Hopefully, they won't also dig up the warped teapot and think we were drunk. In this quiet moment, pride hums through your chest. Not every bowl is perfect. Not every firing succeeds. But this one sings. And for now, that's enough. The morning after a successful firing, the workshop feels lighter, as though the smoke and sweat have cleared, leaving only quiet pride in the air. You stretch your shoulders, stiff from bending over the kiln, and begin packing the most flawless pieces into straw-lined baskets. These are bound for nobles, monasteries, or even the royal court itself. Each piece is not just pottery, it's an ambassador, a polished envoy of Goryeo artistry. Mainstream fact first, Goryeo celadon wasn't merely admired domestically, it was exported across seas, especially to Japan and China, where collectors praised its translucence and delicate inlay. Some chronicles even suggest the Song dynasty envied Goryeo glaze so much they tried, and often failed, to reproduce its jade-like sheen. Imagine sending your neighbour a pie, only for them to try copying the recipe for centuries without quite nailing it. That's you and your bowls. You crouch to inspect a shipment marked for Kaesong, the capital. The cart creaks under the weight, the driver fussing with ropes to keep the straw-wrapped treasures from jostling. You slip one more plate inside, then pat the bundle like a farewell hug. There's always risk, bumpy roads, sudden rains, or clumsy handlers. Joke number 1. Imagine surviving a roaring dragon kiln, only to get cracked by a pothole. Payment, when it arrives, comes in many forms: grain, cloth, or coins. Sometimes it's generous, other times insultingly modest. The quirky tidbit: there are records of potters being paid not in coin but in medicinal herbs, or even live chickens. So yes, your masterpiece bowl might buy you a squawking hen that keeps you awake at dawn. A fair trade? Debatable. As for the royals, their orders come through middlemen, who may exaggerate the court's demands. A rumour circulates that one aristocrat insisted his bowls be so thin they'd crack if he stared too hard. Historians still argue whether such tales are exaggeration or genuine evidence of nobles turning aesthetics into absurdity. You shrug. Thin bowls, fat egos, it's all the same. The day drifts on with a quiet rhythm. Local villagers stop by, sometimes trading rice for simpler wares. You hand over sturdy cups, nothing like the delicate moonlit glaze reserved for lords, but good enough for daily soup. Watching them leave with smiles feels oddly satisfying. Joke number 2. At least you know these bowls won't end up locked in a cabinet, afraid of being touched. Later, a merchant from the coast arrives, eyeing your work with calculating squints. He mentions possible buyers in Japan, tea masters who crave the subtle green glow. You try not to grin too wide. The idea of your handiwork sitting on tatami mats across the sea is surreal, like sending your child to live with strangers. Will they appreciate it, or just spill soy sauce on it? Still, every successful sale buys more clay, more food, and maybe, just maybe, a little comfort for your family. Payment day feels like a festival in miniature. Coins clinking, baskets filling, spirits lifted. And while no one sings songs about potters counting chickens as wages, the relief is real. At twilight, you sit with fellow artisans, coins jingling softly in pouches by your sides. Someone jokes about pooling payment to buy a donkey with extravagant taste. Joke number 3. We'll feed it rice in celadon bowls, so it knows it's noble. Laughter bubbles through the group, lightening the burden of smoke, sweat, and cracked clay. As darkness creeps across the workshop, you realize that your labor stretches far beyond this village. Each bowl becomes a silent traveler, carrying fragments of your life into halls you'll never enter, into hands that will never touch your calloused palms. Payment may come in chickens or coins, but the true reward, the strange, lingering truth, is that a piece of you leaves with every shard of clay that survives the dragon's breath. The seasons slip by, and with them your rhythm deepens. Clay, fire, glaze, and trade, over and over, like a lullaby you can't stop humming. But while bowls and jars may travel far, your feet mostly stay planted in the familiar dirt of the village. Daily life fills the spaces between kilns, a quieter pottery of routines shaped by family, food, and festival. Each dawn begins with the rooster's sharp announcement, though sometimes you suspect it just crows to laugh at how tired you still are. Joke number 1. It's less an alarm clock, more a feathery heckler. You roll out of your mat, stretch sore shoulders, and help with breakfast. Steamed barley or rice, maybe a bit of soup if fortune's kind. It's plain, but you're grateful. Food fuels both wheel and kiln. Mainstream fact. Records describe how Goryeo commoners' diets leaned heavily on grains, with occasional fish, vegetables, and kimchi's early ancestors. Yes, even then, fermented cabbage was creeping its way into the national story. You chew and imagine nobles somewhere fussing over tiny porcelain cups of imported delicacies, while you're mostly hoping your soup doesn't taste like yesterday's ashes. After breakfast, you check on family. Children chase one another through the courtyard, their laughter bouncing off clay jars drying in the sun. A spouse or elder relative helps with smaller tasks, gathering wood, trimming glaze drips, keeping accounts of which merchant owes what. The household blends survival with craft. No one is idle. Not really. Quirky tidbit. Some potters supposedly taught children to practice throwing clay by giving them old broken shards to grind into dust again. Clay recycling before recycling was cool. Dust under fingernails became a childhood rite of passage. Festivals punctuate the grind, offering splashes of colour against the brown backdrop of work. On Buddha's birthday, lanterns drift through the night sky like glowing bowls turned upside down, floating away. You find yourself staring at them, wondering if your pottery, too, will someday float across centuries, glowing in museums instead of flames. Historians still argue whether common artisans attended these temple festivals as participants or stood back at the edges, watching their patrons enjoy the pageantry. You imagine yourself somewhere in between, sneaking glances while still worrying about the next firing. Midday brings chores. You might patch a leaky roof, mend clothing, or help carve wooden paddles for mixing glaze. Life is not just clay, though it always circles back to it. The smell of smoke clings to your hair, a reminder that even while repairing a fence, you are still at heart a potter. Evenings sometimes gather neighbours together. Someone brings a flute, another hums a folk song. Laughter mixes with the crackle of small cooking fires. You join in, telling exaggerated stories of dragons that breathe not fire but glaze, turning entire mountains into celadon in one swipe. Joke number 2. If only dragons worked for commission, our shelves would be full by now. The cycle of seasons dictates your craft. Spring brings new clay softened by rains. Summer demands longer days at the kiln. Autumn promises markets bustling with buyers stocking for winter. And winter, well, winter is when your fingers crack in the cold. The clay stiffens and everything feels harder. Yet winter also offers evenings huddled close, drinking warm barley tea from slightly chipped cups that still do their job. Through it all, family is your anchor. Children learn by watching, tracing patterns in the dirt that mimic lotus flowers, echoing the inlays you carve into real bowls. You can't help but smile at their earnest concentration, their giggles when the lines go crooked. Joke number 3. Every crooked lotus is just a flower dancing in the wind. Life isn't glamorous. No one will write ballads about how you fetched water or patched cracks. Yet the ordinariness carries its own quiet beauty. The scrape of spoon against bowl, the way lantern light pools in glaze, the laughter of neighbors despite sore backs. These are the unglazed truths that fire the spirit as surely as the kiln fires clay. And so, day by day, you live not only as a potter but as a parent, neighbor, and human being, weaving your story into the larger fabric of Goryeo life, as steady and enduring as clay hardened into stone. Night falls again, and with it the quiet rhythm that frames your life. The kiln embers fade, their glow retreating into soft orange, like coals sighing themselves to sleep. You sit outside, spine against a cool wall, listening to cicadas chanting their endless lullaby. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth, and the stars above hang steady, indifferent, yet comforting. Mainstream fact. Goryeo society placed artisans like you within the lower tiers of the class system, above slaves, but far beneath scholars and nobles. And yet, despite this, your work reached those very elites, even royals. There's irony in that contrast, a reminder that history is written by brush-wielding scholars but supported, quite literally, by bowl-making hands. You look down at your fingers, knuckles rough, nails permanently rimmed with clay. Calluses form their own map of where labor has etched itself into your skin. You flex them slowly. They hurt, yes, but they're also the same hands that have coaxed bowls from spinning mud, bowls that shimmer like pale jade in moonlight. The quirky tidbit. Some aristocrats reportedly thought artisans' hands were too dirty for ceremonial spaces, yet would still admire their celadon as symbols of refinement. It's a contradiction worthy of a laugh. Joke number 1. Apparently, dirty hands make clean art. Historians still argue whether potters found personal pride in their work, or if they accepted it merely as survival. You decide pride is unavoidable. Even if your name is never written in any court record, every finished piece bears silent witness to your persistence. You may not be remembered, but your bowls will. A neighbor joins you for a cup of warm rice wine, served, of course, in a slightly chipped cup. Proof that even the imperfect pieces still have a role. You clink the rim lightly, and the sound rings like a tiny bell. Joke number 2. Not exactly court music, but it'll do. The night deepens. Dogs bark in the distance. Somewhere a baby fusses, then quiets. And you sit, half tipsy, watching your breath drift in the cool air. The cycle of work and rest, of clay and fire, feels endless yet oddly soothing. Tomorrow will come, with its own cracked jars, stubborn clay, and merchant haggling. But tonight, you have a moment to simply exist, breathing under stars, knowing your place in this quiet, enduring story. You glance at one of your bowls, catching moonlight in its glaze. It looks like it's holding a fragment of the night sky itself. You smile faintly. Joke number 3. Who knew the moon would let itself be stolen and sold by the bowl? The thought lingers as you close your eyes. And in that closing, your labor, your laughter, and your life blur into the same steady rhythm that hums through every potter's village, every kiln's exhale, every shard left in the dirt for future hands to find. Now the story softens, the edges blur, and the pace eases into stillness. You picture the kiln's embers fading into ash, warm but no longer fierce, their crackle replaced by silence. The clay is finished for the day, the tools set aside, the world outside your door wrapped in darkness and cricket song. You are safe here, in this gentle rhythm of centuries past. Nothing presses, nothing demands. The bowls you shaped will wait. The fire has done its work, and the night stretches long and calm. Your breath slows as you imagine the cool air brushing against your face, carrying with it the faintest trace of wood smoke and earth. Think of your hands, no longer aching but weightless, resting quietly as though they too have turned to smooth stone. The village sleeps, and you are part of that sleep, carried along by the hush of leaves, the soft padding of footsteps fading, the hush of the river nearby. Time itself feels slower, stretched thin like glaze over clay, holding you gently. You are enough. Your work is enough, and the night holds you without asking anything in return. Let your thoughts drift like lanterns rising into the sky, each one glowing softly until it disappears into the distance. Let the rhythm of your breath carry you deeper, steadier, quieter. And as your eyes grow heavy, remember that every story, even the most ordinary one, can cradle you into rest. This one has carried you across kilns, clay, and centuries, only to arrive here at stillness. So let go and let the quiet hold you. Good night, traveller. Sweet dreams, end of script. Sweet dreams.